Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. We're on day 68, and today we're sort of taking a little break to review what we know about time expressions. Now that we've learned how to tell time, and recently we learned how to state dates and things like this, it's a good time to pause and look back over all of the time expressions we've seen and group them according to case. And the reason this is important is because this can get confusing very quickly because unfortunately in Russian, there's not a single case that's used in all time expressions, right? It might be nice if we use the genitive, for example, in all time expressions, but we only use it in certain expressions, right? So actually, all of the cases are used in various time expressions. The case just depends on the particular expression. Okay, so for example, we'll start today with the instrumental of time, right? When do we use the instrumental? Basically, for times of day and seasons of the year. Right, so if we take for example, Vyesna, meaning spring, we put it into what we might call the instrumental of time and say Vyesnoi, that would mean in the spring. We're telling when something is happening. Again, why instrumental? Well, there's no obvious reason, right? Why instrumental and why not genitive, or why not accusative in this case, for example, right? Because after all, other units of time will use the accusative of time or the genitive of time or the dative of time. Right, so basically the best way to learn this, I think, is to just list these very common expressions in terms of the case they require. So let's start with the instrumental, and this is fairly simple, right? Times of day, утро, день, вечер, ночь, right? We put those into the instrumental of time and we get times of the day, like in the morning, and in the day, during the day, in the evening, and so forth. Утром, днем, вечером, ночью. Now, remember, yesterday we talked about how if we're telling time and we're basically using these same nouns to specify AM, PM, we would normally use the genitive, right? We would say something like at 5 o'clock of the evening, right? В 5 часов вечера and not вечером, right? But that little detail aside, right, we generally use the instrumental with these times of the day and also with seasons, right? So весна, лето, осень, зима. We simply put those nouns into the instrumental of time, and we get a new expression meaning during the spring, during the summer. Весной, летом, осенью, зимой. Now, for times of day, we can throw in adverbs вчера, сегодня, завтра to tell which day we're talking about, right? Like today in the evening, this evening, we would say that in Russian with сегодня вечером. Куда вы пойдете сегодня вечером? What about last night, yesterday evening? Вчера вечером я был в театре. And tomorrow morning, right, tomorrow in the morning, завтра утром я пойду на работу. Okay. What about seasons? So to specify last spring or next spring or whatever, well, we just use these adjectives that we've seen already. Этот, прошлый, следующий, right? Literally this, last, and next or following, meaning the future, the next spring, next summer, or whatever. So those are adjectives, so they're going to agree with their noun, and in this case, we're getting the instrumental, right? So мы увидимся следующей весной, right? Следующей весной, that's feminine instrumental, right? Next spring, the following spring. Прошлой зимой я был в России. Last winter, right? Feminine instrumental, I was in Russia. Куда вы поедете этим летом, right? Where are you going this summer, right? If we need to be specific. Этим летом versus, again, прошлым летом, следующим летом, and so on. Okay, now, by the way, the exercises in the book are mostly free response questions, just asking you to practice some of these expressions, since we have talked about most of these already. So today we'll just kind of look through the examples and not really do as many exercises. Okay, what about accusative of time? Okay, this is going to take longer to cover. There are quite a few uses of the accusative in time expressions. So let's just go one by one. First of all, days of the week. Here after the preposition в. So, понедельник, вторник, среда, четверг, пятница, суббота, воскресенье. We simply add в plus the accusative to say on Monday, on Tuesday, etc. So watch the days that are feminine are of course going to change in the accusative, but otherwise with the masculines or neuters we can't see any change. В понедельник, во вторник, в среду. Note the vowel shift there, the stress shift. From среда we get в среду. which is somewhat unusual. В четверг, в пятницу, в субботу, в воскресенье. Okay, if you're speaking of future plans, we also get the accusative with na, right? This is a very common use, little expression. For example, какие у вас планы на пятницу? Okay, so here we're using this with the day of the week. What are your plans, I guess literally on to or for Friday with the accusative? Or вот расписание на эту неделю, right? Here's the schedule for this week. Now, one little detail, sometimes people make the mistake. If you're asked this question, какие у вас планы на пятницу, right, what are your plans for Friday? And then you go on to tell what you will do on Friday. Well, there we're back to using the, right? So you would answer this question saying, well, в пятницу мы поедем в Москву or something. On Friday, we will go to Moscow. You would no longer use this на пятницу construction. Okay, that's kind of unusual, by the way, because so often in Russian, an answer would just follow the logic, more or less word for word, of the question, right? So this is somewhat unusual for Russian, where you get this shift in terms of the constructions you're using. Okay, anyway, here are a couple of adverbs. I don't think we've seen. Позавчера means the day before yesterday, and послезавтра, literally after tomorrow, means the day after tomorrow. Okay, third use of the accusative of time, expressions of duration. I think this is the first time expression we learned, period, in this book. Right, so if you take a noun for a unit of time like час, день, неделя, and so forth, we simply put it into the accusative. We get what we could call an accusative of time expression, meaning for this period of time, for a day, for an hour, for a week, etc. Right, and we can also throw in numbers, of course, at this point, where we know how to do that, right? So this is something a little bit new, right? 4 часа. Okay, that means 4 hours. Here we're really putting this, all of these time expressions are actually in the accusative, but remember the accusative for these number noun combinations don't change unless, by the way, we're dealing with animates. So there is, as I mentioned yesterday, there's more to say about this, but we're going to save that until book 4, I believe. Okay, so 4 часа could mean simply 4 hours, or it can mean for 4 hours, right? Understood as an accusative time expression. Два дня, that means 2 days. It could also mean for 2 days. 3 вечера, for 3 evenings, and so on and so forth. Okay, what about also with весь and целый, right? Whole, entire, right? These two adjectives that are fairly close in meaning. Those also combine with the accusative case in time expressions. For example, весь час, целый час, for a whole hour, for an entire hour, or for the whole hour, by the way, it could be. Целый день, for example, would be for an entire day. Весь день, all day. Now look at the one for week. It's always useful to look at this one because it's feminine, right? So when we're using неделя, we can clearly see that we are indeed using the accusative, right? So, for example, целую неделю or всю неделю. Okay, so let's take some examples. Она месяц писала эту статью. Okay, so we know месяц means month. Here, based on context, we're interpreting it as in the accusative. And she wrote the article for a month. She was writing it. She was working on it for a month. Месяц. Now, again, we could substitute неделю, again, in the accusative, and that would mean she was working on it for a week. Он 3 часа готовил ужин. He spent 3 hours making dinner. He was cooking it for 3 hours. Я целую неделю читал эту книгу. I've been reading this book, or I've been reading this book for an entire week, or I spent an entire week reading this book, right? There are different ways we could translate this into English. Okay, number 4, the fourth major use of the accusative of time is to express not duration, right? Not I was doing this for a week or whatever, but rather an accomplishment after the preposition za. So this would mean something like, again, not I was working on it for a week, but I got it done in a week, within an hour, within 2 hours. And so that type of expression in Russian is za plus accusative. Okay, so again, just more examples. За час, за день, за вечер. right? All of these expressing accomplishment, right? You need to get something accomplished within an evening, within a week, within a month, etc. Okay, now if we wanted to emphatically say 1 hour, right? You have 1 hour to do this or whatever. За один час, за один день, right? We could, of course, use один that way. Or we could throw in number expressions. Again, we know how to use numbers now with nouns. And again, all of these numbers are actually going into the accusative, though they're not changing, right? So, for example, за 4 часа, within 4 hours, за 2 дня, within 2 days, and so on and so forth. Okay, because these expressions focus on result, right, on accomplishment, they would tend to be used with perfective verbs. So they can serve as sort of a perfective red flag. Now, you may remember I warned you back in the day that perfective red flags aren't as reliable as imperfective red flags because we could always have, for example, repetition, right? So, for example, if you said, every week I have to write an article within 2 hours or something. It's kind of a bad example, but right. Well, getting repetition, that would call for the imperfective. But normally, if you're talking about a one-time activity, right, you need to write this particular article within 2 hours. Well, that would call for the perfective. So, for example, журналист за месяц написал 2 статьи. Okay, so he wrote 2 articles, perfective. It took him a month, right? So within a month, what did he accomplish? Well, he got 2 articles written. All right, студентка прочитала 4 романа за 2 семестра. Right, so within 2 semesters, right, in 2 semesters, what did she accomplish? Well, she got 4 novels read. She read 4 novels, perfective verb form. Finally, another 5th use of the accusative of time is frequency. Okay, so this would normally be, well, for example, with каждый. Каждый means every, and that is used in the accusative with time expressions to describe, obviously, frequency, right? Every minute, every hour, every day, etc. Каждую минуту, каждый час, каждый день, каждую неделю. Again, all in the accusative, but just, again, note that only the feminines are changing their form. All right, what about once per whatever? Well, again, now we're a bit more comfortable with these expressions. We use the word раз, meaning a time you do something, like once, twice, 3 times, etc. So we can combine that with a number, один раз, or simply раз, два раза, 3 раза, 4 раза, right? 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. And now this noun раз is a bit funny. We've mentioned it before. In the genitive plural, it looks like the nominative singular. And while that may certainly strike us as bizarre, this was actually the original genitive plural form in Slavic, right? It looked like the genitive plural tended to look like the nominative singular. And sometimes in a very few isolated examples, we see that still in modern Russian. But today, of course, we think of it as simply an exception. So, for example, пять раз, right? It's not пять разов or something. Okay, so несколько раз, several times, and 100 раз, 100 times. Okay, if we want to throw in within, once per minute, once per day, once per whatever, that per expression in Russian is going to be v plus accusative. Right, so раз в минуту would mean once per week, once per minute. 2 раза в день would be twice per day. 3 раза в неделю would be 3 times per week, and so forth. Okay, one more useful expression with раз. We can throw in an ordinal numeral, right, one of these adjectives, to say for the first time, for the second time, for the third time. В первый раз. Another form of that is впервые. That's just an adverb that means pretty much the same thing. Впервые, for the first time. В другой раз, в третий раз, четвертый раз, etc. So note, by the way, that in place of второй, we say другой. Sometimes that happens in just basically certain expressions, right? So instead of saying literally the second time, во второй раз, we usually hear в другой раз, meaning another time, a second time. But otherwise, we use the ordinal forms we learned the other day, right? В третий раз, for the third time, в четвертый, в пятый, в сотый, and another useful one, в последний раз, meaning for the last time. Okay, so let's think about what aspect would these frequency expressions be used with? Well, since the imperfective describes repetition, all of these would be considered very, very reliable imperfective red flags, right? So useful to keep in mind. Okay, what about the dative in time expressions? This is a very limited set of examples. So the dative is not used in very many time expressions at all. But the first one is quite useful, right? Speaking of deadlines, by a certain time or by a certain deadline, we get к. Все это надо сделать к понедельнику. Все это надо сделать к понедельнику. Okay, so к plus the dative here with the day of the week, right? You've got to get this done by Monday. And also fairly common. What if you're talking about what day of the week something happens, but it does so every Monday, every Wednesday, or whatever? For example, we have lectures on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Well, then you get по plus the dative plural. Right, so it's just kind of a formula we have to learn, right? У нас лекции по вторникам и четвергам, right? For on Tuesdays and on Thursdays, по plus the dative plural. But again, the dative is very limited in terms of its time expressions. Okay, what about the prepositional? Now we've seen a lot of these fairly recently. So first major use would be with weeks, right? Talking about the noun неделя. That's a non-noun, by the way, also very useful to remember. And so we say literally things like on what week, right? On this week, on last week. На какой неделе, right? But, otherwise we often get в instead, right? So в какой день, but на какой неделе. And we would answer на этой неделе, на прошлой неделе, на следующей неделе, and so forth. Okay, when giving the month only, right? In what month did something happen? Well, in Russian, kind of like in English, that's в plus the prepositional. So, for example, в январе, феврале, в марте, в апреле, в мае, в июне, в июле, в августе, в сентябре, в октябре, в ноябре, в декабре. Okay, so we've been over that already. That's just review. And note that a lot of these nouns are in-stressed, right? Not all of them, but a lot of them end up having stress on the ending. For example, в январе. Okay, when giving the year only, we use the prepositional of time, right? To answer the question, в каком году, literally in what year. Okay, so remember that only the final element of the number, whatever the year, right, it's going to be a compound number usually. Whatever the final component is will be what's used in the ordinal form and also in the prepositional case modifying год, or actually году, right, in the prepositional. Он родился в 1978 году. Okay, so literally in the 1978th year in Russian. Only that final component, eighth, is being modified there. Okay, we could also use этот, прошлый, and следующий, as we know, with the noun год, году, right, to talk about in this year, in last year, in the following year. В этом году я работаю, в прошлом году я еще учился, в следующем году я поеду в Россию. All right, finally, with decades, you may remember, and you may remember that for these, you could use the accusative as well. That's also very common. So here you have an option. Он сказал, что в 90-х годах, right, that's prepositional plural, which we haven't learned yet. We will next chapter, but it's very easy, right? So he said that in the 90s, в 90-х годах, instead of prepositional plural, we can use accusative plural, which would be 90-е годы, в 90-е годы, плохо жилось, а в нулевых стало лучше. Okay, I don't think we mentioned this the other day. Нулевые would be in the noughts, or however you choose to call that, right? 2001, 2002, etc. In the zeros. Okay, what about the genitive of time? Well, this is also fairly limited, but some very important ones, right, that we learned just recently. When you're stating exact dates, right, like the day and the month, and then you could also throw in the year when an event occurred, right? So remember, we're not simply stating the date. If we were simply stating it, we would basically be using the nominative, right? Well, the number in its nominative form followed by whatever case it requires. But when we want to tell when with the date, we get the genitive, again, we could call it the genitive of time that we use with dates. So, for example, November the 2nd, if we were simply stating that, remember it would be второе ноября. But if we want to say something happened on November 2nd, we have to switch to genitive, right? Она родилась второго ноября. Второго is the genitive of the neuter singular adjective второе, meaning the second date. Now remember, the noun that's being understood here is число, right? Число, meaning number or date, which is neuter singular. That explains why we're getting neuter singular adjectival forms here. Okay, what if we add the year here? Well, we say она родилась второе ноября, right? No change, genitive of time, on the 2nd of November. And then we say of the 2014th year. Again, only the final component of the number, in this case 14, is being used in its ordinal form. And of course, it's going into the genitive, which makes good sense, right? On the 2nd of November of this particular year. Okay, also the genitive of time is used in some very common prepositions. От, с, meaning from, до, meaning until, and около, meaning approximately, which we learned just recently. Встретимся около 5, let's meet around 5. Я буду в Москве со среды до субботы, right, with days of the week. I'll be in Moscow from Wednesday until Saturday. And with time spans, right, я буду заниматься с 6 до 7. С, до, both followed by the genitive. Okay, so to complete our review today, what about prepositions of time? Well, we've learned, I think, pretty much all of the important ones already. And so, again, we might just take a moment to try to group them by case and give some simple examples, but hopefully these are quite familiar by now. If not, you definitely want to learn these. These are extremely common, obviously. So what about genitives? До, meaning before, at any point prior to, by the way, not just before, but at any point before, at any point prior to, or until. So some simple examples. До войны, before the war. От 2 до 3, right, with time spans, from 2 until 3. После means after. For example, после войны, после урока. Около, as we know, means around or approximately. Около 5 or около 5 дней, right, around 5 days, genitive. От, meaning from or since or whatever. От 5 до 7, from 5 to 7. Дети от 5 лет, for example, children 5 and above, literally children from 5 years. С means as of. So as we know, it generally means from or off of a flat surface, but here temporally it means from in the sense of starting on, right? Or as of or since. So с июня, right? As of June, from June, right? Or starting in June. Or, for example, с детства, right? Since childhood or from childhood or something. Okay, now we get a few genitive case expressions that are obviously really prepositional phrases. During means in the time of. So that makes sense. During the performance, во время спектакля, in the time of the performance, of the spectacle. Over the course of, or during the course of течение is a noun that literally means flow, the flow of time or whatever, the course of a certain period. And we get в течение, in the course of. For example, в течение 10 лет, over the course of 10 years, or throughout these 10 years, for 10 whole years. I guess there are different ways we could translate this. Okay, what about accusative prepositions? Well, the first example here, назад, you may remember we might call that a postposition in the sense that it comes after the noun it goes with, but that noun is still in the accusative. So we say назад takes the accusative, but to be precise, we might call it a postposition instead of a preposition. 2 года назад, 2 years ago. Right, now remember there, that number 2, we would say that is in the accusative, but it's not changing its form, because here it's inanimate, and года, of course, remains in the genitive singular because that's what 2 requires. right? So in some cases, these issues of case agreement may be a little bit, there may be more than one thing going on here in any particular expression. A week ago, неделю назад. There's a simple one, and we can see there clearly that неделю is in the accusative. Okay, через means from now. And the next two are tricky, by the way. Через and za are often confused. You might want to circle both of these. The reason they're confused is that they're typically translated into English, both of them, as in. All right, so look at the difference. Через 2 года means in 2 years in the sense of from now, right? 2 years from now. Literally across 2 years. If you think of this, the literal meaning of через as across, it may help you remember it. Across 2 years, again, across understood not spatially but temporally, right? 2 years from now. 2 years from now. Через 2 года, через час, right? Across an hour from now. Now compare that with za, which we just learned today. That means that can express accomplishment, right? Within what period of time you got something done. So we could say in English, I got that done in an hour. So again, we're using in both of these examples, but in Russian, через and za are very different in meaning, right? So za час, we might say in an hour, or maybe just to be a bit clearer, within an hour, or za 5 часов, within 5 hours. Now here's something that's a bit less common. По plus the accusative is used with spans like of dates, for example, or days, and it's inclusive. Right, so if you say до пятницы, it means until Friday, but it doesn't imply that you're going to remain or do whatever it is you're talking about throughout Friday, right, inclusively. So if you want to make that clear, you say по пятницу, meaning I'll be in town through Friday, and maybe, implying I'm leaving late Friday or maybe early Saturday or something. Or we could also use that with months, по июнь, right? That implies that you're staying, for example, from August through June, meaning you'll be there pretty much all of June. Okay, finally, instrumental. This is fairly limited in terms of temporal prepositions. Перед means just before. So you might want to contrast this. Перед plus instrumental means just before something happens or right before. Compare that with до, which means at any point prior. Right? So, for example, перед уроком means just before class. Like, hey, maybe I'll run into you right before class and borrow a pencil. Versus, for example, you need to have the work done before class, meaning at some point, at any point prior to class. That would be до урока. Okay? Or перед выходом. Now, they're in the temporal sense. Well, it could be understood both ways. The выход could mean the exit, or it could mean the activity, exiting. Okay, so let's do one exercise here, just reviewing case endings, right? Case agreement with prepositions. Right? What do you normally, number one, what do you usually do before class, meaning right before class? Что ты обычно делаешь перед уроком? Right, instrumental. Number two, do you always do your assignment prior to class? Okay, now we're talking at any point prior to class, not right before class necessarily. Ты всегда делаешь задание до урока? До урока, до plus the genitive. Number three, do you write SMS messages during lecture, right? In the time of lecture. Ты пишешь SMS-сообщения во время лекции? Number four, do your parents work from 5 until 9? I think I meant to say from 9 to 5. Okay, твои родители работают с 9 до 5, right? С 9 до 5. From 9 to 5. Okay, 5, ты будешь на кампусе? All right, will you be on campus from July through August, right? So here we're saying not until August, but through August, по plus the accusative. So this will be с июля по август. Okay, 6, where did you live a year ago? Okay, назад, that's that post position that requires the accusative, so this will be simply год назад, right, a year ago. 7, where will you live across 5 years, right, 5 years from now? Через takes the accusative, no change here, через 5 лет, через 5 лет. Okay, 8, where will you be around 7 in the evening? Где ты будешь около, genitive 7, около 7 вечера. 9, for how many years have you studied in graduate school. Okay, so, or actually, this is a учится, right? It's third plural. So this is a general question for how many years do people study in graduate school? Well, we could give an approximate amount, right? How long does it take you to write your dissertation? Well, we never know for sure, right? So let's say around 6 years. Около 6 лет would be an example. Okay, number 10, a free response question again. Когда ты будешь в России? So if we want to give a time span, right, for example, with months, we would use с, по. Again, по there is the inclusive version, right? So if I'm going to be there from March through June, that would be с марта по июнь, right? По plus the accusative there. Okay, that's it for today's lesson. So quite a bit to take in, but hopefully, a lot of this was review, so hopefully you're quite comfortable with it. And we should say that this covers pretty much all of the major time expressions. There's not a whole lot left to really say on this topic. So this chapter hopefully is a nice overview of what we've learned so far. And of course, all of these are extremely common, so it would be a great idea to really nail down these expressions. Okay, so that's it for today. Until next time, до свидания, товарищи. Вперед к новым победам.